Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our first Save Alcohol History Foundation lecture review. Before we get started, we want to mention a couple of big things. If you have not renewed your membership, please do so. If you're not a member, haven't been a member before, please check out our membership options. We do have forms right over on the table. And if you are new to our group, please check out savealcoholhistory.org. I believe that's the web address. I never remember that one, right? That has more information about upcoming events, upcoming speakers, all that. So today's presentation is Dr. Tom Okie of Kennesaw State University. I'm just going to read his bio off the school website. He's a historian of agriculture, environment of the modern United States. Grew up in Middle Georgia, studied history at Covenant College and the University of Georgia, and teaches courses on modern U.S. history, historical methods, history education, and food history. He serves as an associate editor of the Journal of Agricultural History, and his work has won prizes from the Society of American Historians, the Southern Historical Association, the Agricultural History Society, and the Georgia Historical Society. His first book is The Georgia Peach, Culture, Agriculture, and Environment of the American South, and is what he's speaking about today. Without further ado, Dr. Okie.
Thanks, Andrew, and thanks, Joe, for having me out. This is a fun thing I get to do sometimes, talk about my work with just interested people, and not necessarily the professional scholars that I usually talk with. So I'm also excited this is a March presentation. I usually do peach stuff in the summertime. I've discovered since publishing this book that it's a blessing and a curse, because every summer now I get contacted by some journalist somewhere who's like, it's peach season, say something about peaches for us. I've pretty much run out of interesting things to say, but this March is a cool time to talk about peaches because they're starting to bloom right now. So, do you know what peach blooms look like? Can you recognize them? Yeah, cool. Well, this is a peach. This is just a seedling that was growing in my backyard when I first moved to Kennesaw in 2013. They can be quite handsome trees, right? As a flowering tree. But those seedling peaches that are kind of everywhere, they're all on roadsides. I was walking with my daughter past the Whole Foods just this afternoon, and we saw, like, buried underneath this dead kudzu vines, there's these little peach seedlings sticking out.
I hope it makes it.
Yeah, we'll see. But those seedling peaches are not what made the Georgia peach, even though they seem like they were kind of wild and growing everywhere. It's not why we are famous for peaches here. So I wanted to kind of focus on one aspect of the Georgia peach story, and that's the making of a modern peach. So if you don't hear anything else, hear this, that a peach is a creation of both humans and non-humans. So you need both for it to happen, right? You need the peach's biology, the way that it needs a certain number of chilling hours every winter or it won't fruit, the way that it sometimes tastes really, really good. All those features of how peaches live and express themselves are important to the story. But you also needed humans to make something called the Georgia peach. So the book project that I published in 2016, the basic kind of layman's question behind it was, what's with all the peaches? Like, why are peaches all over the state tied up there in the Georgia peach? Peach Bowl, Atlanta 1996, the Olympics, where they actually dug up a bunch of peach trees from Fort Valley and planted them around the
That's where
ceremony.
I'm from.
Are you from Fort Valley? Okay, cool.
My father was a peach farmer.
Really? What's his name?
It was Wainwright Farmer.
Wainwright? Okay. I never talked with
In
him.
Taylor County.
Taylor County, yeah.
You probably talked to the Lanes.
I talked to the Lanes and the Pearsons and the
yeah,
Dickies.
yeah.
Those are the ones that I mostly talked to, but I heard a lot about Jeff Wainwright. That was your dad?
Don.
Don.
Was the, yeah. Don.
Those
and-
brothers.
We're brothers.
Okay. So yeah, there's peaches everywhere. Why are they such a big deal in Georgia? That was the basic premise of the book. Despite the fact that if you look at like a list of agricultural commodities of the state, peaches are pretty far down. Pine straw was more important than peaches last time I
Well, you
checked.
can't put that on the license plate.
No, but what can you, right? Of course, chickens are by far the most important agricultural product in the state now. But even cotton stayed like a very important agricultural commodity. So the answer I came up with was essentially well, there was a kind of like boom in peaches, and this is kind of the rise. There was a moment when everything was peaches down in Georgia. That was the song from 1918. And you can see like it's a pretty precipitous climb from 1889 to 1924, and started to go down after that. The number of trees in the state. Like 15 million trees is a lot of trees, a lot of peach trees. So I came up with 3 things, and they're the subtitle of the book, basically. The environment, so non-humans, the peach, Prunus persica, which is the scientific name of the peach, but also things like peach, plum curculios, or peach borers, or brown rot. The weather is a non-human entity in history that makes a big difference. As you know, that Fort Valley area in Georgia, it's on kind of a plateau, and that meant that they got enough cold weather to produce peaches, but also the frost or cold temperatures settle in lower elevations. So they kind of, when a lot of other people lost their fruit, they did not lose their fruit in the spring. So all that played a role in the creation of the Georgia peach. But also agriculture, so human knowledge and work with the growers, but also the laborers. There would not have been a peach industry without a lot of poor people who were at loose ends and needed work. Mostly cotton workers who then, because peaches kind of intersected perfectly with cotton, the tasks, so you could chop cotton and then go pick peaches and then go pick cotton. And then the third thing is culture, just our need for stories. So the peach made a great story. It's like the South was enthralled to King Cotton, and then a few noble people realized that we needed some more crops, and they started planting peaches, and then Queen Peach dethroned King Cotton. It's a great story. It was not true, but it tapped into something that people need. So what I want to talk about today is the creation of the modern peach. So the modern peach is not like this seedling, this pit. Peaches did grow really well, but they grew not just in Georgia, but all over the eastern seaboard. They were first introduced with Spanish settlers around St. Augustine, Florida, in the 16th century. There's some really interesting recent research where they've discovered peach pit remains in native communities up and down, like throughout the eastern U.S. By the time the colonists arrived at Jamestown, 1607, so like just a few decades, there were already peach trees growing there, and they thought they were native. So very, very quickly, Native Americans took the peach as a fruit that they liked. They would cultivate them in orchards and use them for a variety of things, a lot more things than Europeans used them for. They used them for poultices, and they dried the fruits, and they did things with the bark. John Lawson in 1709, he said, I love this line, the peaches grow up so readily they make our land a wilderness of peach trees.
That's cute.
But that's not what made the Georgia peach. What I want to talk about today is the variety known as the Alberta. Have you heard of the Alberta peach? A handful of you, yeah. Can you name any other peach variety? You
Alexander.
Good job.
I know there's a clingstone, but I don't think that's a variety.
Right, so they're either clingstone or freestone, or partially somewhere in between. How about apples? Have you bought an apple recently?
Can't afford them.
What was it? Do you know what it was called?
Honeycrisp.
Honeycrisp. There you go.
Red Delicious.
Red Delicious, Pink Lane, Cosmic Crisp.
Cosmic Crisp.
So apples are still sold by cultivar. And a cultivar is just a cultivated variety, but it's genetically identical. So it's propagated asexually. In theory anyway, an Alberta peach tree that's growing that you can buy from a nursery today is like the great grandchild of, no, not a child actually, it's actually the same tree as the one that Samuel Rumpf planted in 1870 in Marshall, Georgia, because it's just asexual propagation. You take buds from one tree, put it on another tree. So that's what a cultivar is. It's like it's within this peach species, so it kind of lies underneath the species category. But the point I want to make is that it's a human creation. It requires humans for it to exist at all. And I want to make that point with a kind of side story. So this is a peach called the candy cane. My father, who was a peach breeder for years in Byron, Georgia, so I came to this project naturally, right? He applied for a patent in 2011. It was approved in 2013 for this really striking ornamental flowering peach. So it has these very, most peach blossoms are single 5-petaled flowers. This one had 35 to 40 petals in a flower, all these different colors. And then the leaves were also red and green and green with red streaks. It's a really striking, beautiful peach.
Yeah.
Does not exist anymore, except in image and text.
Mm.
Why?
Why?
How can a peach cultivar just disappear? No one, or not very many people, were willing to pay the licensing fees that you have to pay when you buy a patented variety. Peach trees are not very long-lived trees, 20, 30 years max. And so the original trees that my dad, these pictures that he took in Byron, Georgia in the 90s, maybe, or early 2000s, are no longer there. They were pushed up years ago. So as far as we know, there are no candy cane peaches anywhere in the world. They only exist as described in this patent application. So you need people to continually propagate the tree for a cultivar to exist. And that's one thing that makes the Alberta such a striking story. This, by the way, is how it's done. So to graft, you cut a little T-shaped slit. This is, at least at this time, it's possible the grafting has changed a little bit, but in the 1890s, this is what it looked like. And then you would insert a bud from another tree into that slit and tie it up. And then after a while, the two trees become one. So that's how all commercial peaches are grown. They're all grafted trees. The story of the Alberta is an interesting one. It starts with this peach, the Chinese cling, so this is the mother of the Alberta, and you can see maybe that it's a white fleshed peach. It's also by the name, it's a clingstone. So it's interesting that Alberta is a yellow fleshed freestone peach. Chinese cling was secured, can't say discovered, stolen by this guy, Robert Fortune. He was a Scottish plant explorer. Have you heard of that category, that profession before? It's pretty cool. These guys would travel all over the world looking for germplasm, looking for plants, collect them and then take them back. So he did a lot of looking for tea varietals, because he was British and England had this place called India that they wanted to grow tea in. But he also happened upon this peach that had been selected by Chinese cultivators, who knows over how many years, and he sent it back to England. And then a bud of that peach, that Chinese cling peach, was first imported into the United States in 1850 and ended up in Macon, Georgia, where it was then given to the Rumpf family. So Samuel Rumpf's grandfather, actually, Colonel Lewis Rumpf. So they planted the Chinese cling along with several other these budded varieties, grafted varieties from a Delaware nursery out in their home orchard. And then Samuel Rumpf, when he was a pretty young guy, he planted some seeds of Chinese cling. 1870 supposedly is the story. By that time, he was living in the family estate down in Marshallville. Have you been through Marshallville?
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
I went to a little school there.
Did you really? Okay.
It's no longer there, Beechwood, a little
Okay.
private school. Oh,
Have you driven by Willow Lake? It's still there.
I'm sure, it's probably hard to recognize in that picture, but I'm sure I've ridden by it. Is it on that main road, the main road?
It's it's a little bit. It's like 3 miles outside of town, so it's off of Juice Plant Road.
Well, maybe not.
It's still there. It's still in the family actually. There's a Sam and Deanna Grice. They live or at least they did in Snellville. So I got to go inside, and one of the only surviving photos of this place is a picture of people playing croquet.
Yeah.
And inside the house, there's a croquet set, which I just thought was like, oh, that's so cool. Maybe it's the same croquet set that's in that picture. So Samuel Rumpf, he inherited the family property. He started a little nursery, the Willow Lake Nursery, and you can see, early on, he was advertising his Alexander peaches, not his Alberta. But he, by some reports, 1,200 seedlings that he planted, the Alberta was one of only a handful that he thought might be worth looking at more. This is from 1917, though. Picked green and allowed to ripen in the markets, Alberta is scarcely edible by those who know good peaches, said Ulysses P. Hedrick, the New York horticulturist. It has a kind of astringency and bitter tang. You might have tasted an Alberta recently. Has anybody? Sometimes at roadside stands you can still get Albertas. Anybody have a no? It's a pretty large stone, which is not ideal because of course there's less flesh. It drops as it approaches maturity often. It's not very resistant to flesh browning. It's not as hardy as it might be. And yet, despite all of those shortcomings, it became one of the most important fruit varieties ever released. In 1877, at these horticultural society meetings, Rumpf came and he had 14 seedlings that he was showing. The fruit committee said, these show some promise. A few years later, he had named the variety at this time. By 1881, he called it the Alberta, after his wife, Clara Alberta Moore. And the committee said, yeah, it promises well. Looks like a good fruit. A couple years later, it was approved by the Georgia State Horticultural Society as a recommended variety of peach. And then a few years later, approved by the American Pomological Society. By the 1910s, it was grown in every peach growing state in greater quantities than any other fruit variety. So there were more Alberta peaches growing than Red Delicious. It was a really stupendous variety. Even into the 1960s, it was still in the top 10 of peach varieties in most peach growing states. And in the 1980s, when breeders were sort of looking back at the story of Alberta, they noticed that it was a parent of almost all the modern commercial varieties. So if I go back to this image here, you can kind of see, these are, by the way, this fantastic collection of watercolors from the late 1800s, commissioned by the USDA. Deborah Passmore was really quite an artist. But the Alexander is a white flesh, kind of small peach, right? And that was the most popular, one of the most popular peaches at that time when the Alberta was introduced. When's the last time you had a white fleshed peach? Yeah, it's really not something. So the Alberta basically came to define the peach as a yellow peach. There used to be a lot more diversity in what peaches looked like before the Alberta came along. The Alberta is also the only variety, to my knowledge, to have an ode written to it.
Oh my goodness.
This is, I'll read it for you. Your cheeks reflect the sunset glow, Alberta. Your rounded outlines please me so, Alberta. Your breath is sweet as summer dew, your lifeblood richly flowing through imparts a matchless charm to you. Alberta, you're a peach.
And Maple wrote that.
And this is just one of 4 stanzas, or 5 stanzas.
Oh, my.
It goes on and on.
Well, isn't it?
Yeah. Mabel Schwartz-Withoff was she was from Ohio, but she married somebody who got a job in the peach industry as kind of marketing. So the Withoffs moved to Fort Valley, and she was really instrumental in creating these peach blossom festivals in the 1920s, where they'd have thousands of people came to Fort Valley to kind of celebrate the peach. So the Alberta was the modern peach because it was what I would describe as kind of an industrial peach. It was eminently shippable. It had firm flesh. Like white peaches are delicious. They're kind of prone to bruising. Like bruises show up a lot more easily on white peaches. The skin was pretty strong, so not prone to breakage. It was extremely consistent and predictable. So the peach season became a 3-week Alberta season. Just kind of went up the coast, starting in Georgia and going up through South Carolina and North Carolina, Virginia, and on to New Jersey. The railroads with the refrigerated cars and the commission merchants, they loved that predictability. They knew what to expect. Consumers came to think, well, this is just what a peach is. It's in Alberta. And they were very productive, and then it was pretty much universally adaptable. It was what Ulysses Hedrick called the cosmopolite of peaches. Grew readily everywhere. Even Washington State grew more Albertas than anything else in the 20th century, early 20th century. So that is the story of how the modern peach was made. It was something found by this guy, Samuel Henry Ruff. It's not just a kind of inventor genius story where one, lone person, like if Andrew found a peach variety that was a really good peach, kind of growing on a roadside in Ackworth, it wouldn't change anything unless he was connected to this much larger network of horticultural societies and nurserymen and could kind of keep such a variety, maintain it over generations. I'll stop there. I'm happy to talk more about peaches or answer any other questions, but I'd love to hear what y'all. Yeah.
I have a question. The candy cane peach, how did it taste? Was it especially delicious?
No, it didn't really produce fruits, so it was just an ornamental variety. It would be nice if it had flowers like that and produced delicious fruits, but yeah.
What about the fur on a peach?
Yeah, peach pubescence.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I miss me.
tiny epidermal hairs.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now, sometime in the 20th century, they started defuzzing the peaches.
Oh, okay.
Some of the labels, peach labels, will say defuzzed.
Which was a good thing? You're saying they were itchy?
Yes,
It's itchy, yeah.
It's extremely itchy.
The workers who pick it, they wear long sleeves. They would dust themselves with talcum powder to
That's
keep
a
it.
nitty gritty.
It's like I've heard it described as like fiberglass insulation. That's how it kind of feels.
Yeah.
when you walk on it.
Oh, goodness.
So itchy.
But it seems like it protects the fruit from pests and diseases a little bit. Because nectarines, which are genetically identical to
Same.
peaches, have never really taken off in the South because they have too many skin problems. My dad, I think he released at least one nectarine variety, but he was working on nectarines because
I love nectarines.
Nectarines are
and
delicious,
peaches.
yeah.
I prefer nectarines because of the skin is less thick.
there is much more tender.
Juicy.
I was in an orchard one time and one of the workers said, "Oh, Rama, like a branch," and it was a sport. It was a nectarine. So it was just a peach tree, but just one branch had turned into a nectarine. So this is one of the cool things about peaches is that they're just kind of bursting with genetic variability and waiting for these genes to express themselves. It's really fun.
So when you wrote this book, you traveled all around and talked to the different farmers. What can you tell me? Do you remember which farmers you went to?
Yeah, so I had a long conversation with Bob Dickey Sr., with Al Pearson. At the Lanes, I ended up just only talking to one of the, what's his name? One of the younger generation of Lanes.
So what?
More closer to my age. I talked to a guy who used to do tours at Lane Farms. What's his name? Red. I think his name's Red. He told this great story about, I guess it was Edgar Duke, so one of the ancestors of the Lanes. How he would come to the packing house and he would drive up in like a long Cadillac type car and get out in this white suit.
A typical Georgia farmer, right?
Right. Got his hands dirty. Yeah.
Oh, would you speak to marketing peaches and particularly fresh market versus processed,
Yeah.
particularly like canning and freezing?
Yeah. So one of the big differences between the Georgia peach industry and the industry like California is that there's basically no processed peaches in Georgia. You might still be able to get raggedy ripe canned peaches. So there was a small scale effort to start a canning industry, or Juice Plant Road. I think there was a freezing plant in Macon for a while. It didn't take off in part because there weren't a lot of other fruits to process. So like in California, those canning factories can go all year round, right?
Oh, okay.
But in Georgia, the canning, all that capital would just be kind of lying still for a lot of the year. So there was some canning and processing, but not as much. So in California, they produce about half of the country's peaches, way more than Georgia or South Carolina. But a lot of that is processed. Processing.
One of those slides had Somethingville, Georgia. What was the name of that town?
Marshallville.
Marshallville.
Yeah.
Now, if I would go to Marshallville, would that building be there?
Yeah, the Willow Lake.
That's a house or what?
It's a house.
And is it has somebody dwelling there? Yeah, there it is.
No one's living in it. Last I talked to Sam Grice, he was kind of thinking about how to use the house at that time.
Is Marshallville have other commerce in that town?
Not much.
It is
got
tiny.
like a
Like you
diner.
go down one road and there's some beautiful homes.
See, that's
Yeah.
the part I like.
Beautiful
And this,
homes down
you'd
this
think the
road.
city would
Small.
get
It's
this
so
and do
tiny.
something to
It's-
draw the people in.
In another version of this talk, I make a point of showing this house, which is where he started, and then where his townhouse 3 miles into town. He built this palatial,
Oh,
like
wow.
white columns,
Yes, yes.
That's not in the family anymore, but it's still there. And yeah, it's a really interesting, fairly preserved town because it just hasn't had a lot of.
Yeah, well, Sherman must not have found it.
There was a guy named John Donald Wade. I don't know if you've heard of the Nashville Agrarians, the fugitive poets.
Oh, no.
There was this group of writers in the early 20th century. And Wade was one of those guys. That he was in Marshallville. He called himself like a citizen of Marshallville. That was his first allegiance before the United States. It was like I'm from Marshallville. Yeah.
So I know with bananas, like banana flavored medicine and all is based on an area variety. Does it same apply to peaches?
Peach flavor.
Yeah.
I don't know much about the flavor industry except for what I read in Fast Food Nation, which is that it's basically on the New Jersey Turnpike, all these factories, and that there's not a lot of difference between natural and artificial flavor.
Because I like
But I do know that peaches, they have a lot of volatile oils, and so it's very difficult to get I mean, I've never tasted like a peach flavor that tasted like peaches. I don't know if y'all have, but it's very difficult to.
I like a lot of peaches, but I don't always like peach soda, peach stuff like that. Sometimes it's just not great.
No, yeah, it's a complicated flavor to reproduce, and that's also why like peach juice they investigated lots of peach products, but it was difficult to maintain the flavor of the peach.
Peaches
with
and cream
processing.
ice cream's pretty popular.
That's pretty good.
The, I've got family who lives in North Carolina, so we go past the big peach in Gaffney.
Yeah.
What's a touristy thing in Georgia related to the beaches?
They still do a they have restarted these summertime peach festivals. You can in Fort Valley. There's the world's largest peach cobbler is produced, I think, every year.
Yes.
So and also the big growers all have like stands where you can go and get that delicious peach ice cream and buy fresh peaches and kind of at Lane anyway. You can actually walk above the processing line and watch all the workers.
They're big time.
You can take a
Like
tour.
Restaurant and gift store and.
And where's that again?
Lane is outside of Fort Valley.
Okay.
What's the
96.
96? Yeah. So it's probably the closest to the freeway. It's probably the easiest to get to.
Yeah, I think so.
What's the condition of this building? I'm upset that they've never taken advantage of a landmark like that.
There is a historical marker. There's one of those
Then that's not good enough.
plaques.
They
But,
need to
I know.
have it open to the public.
I feel like Lynn's gonna take a road trip.
I am
You should go. You should go. It's really
Instead of
interesting.
having to warm up
Who
for
am I
me.
talking to? Lynn?
But also, if you live in the Atlanta area, you forget that Georgia is not Atlanta. And like going to South Georgia, it's just a different place. You know?
That's
How far is, if I could ever remember the
Fort
name?
Myers, Marshall.
Yeah, how far is that driving?
I mean, my mom lives in Macon now, so I rarely go to Fort Valley anymore, but it's
For 2 or 3
two,
hours.
yeah.
Okay, that's like a nice, fun start out in the morning.
There you go.
Yeah. But it
I
gotta
knew-
have, I mean, it has to be a destination place.
I have to see if she's still around. But there was a wonderful woman who took me around Marshallville, like a local historian.
I used to go up to doors in Georgia when we were traveling the South and knock on the door and, can I get your house? And then we had, I think it was Atlanta. And the guy, we went up to the door and the guy says, well, let me get my mother. And it was the one in, Roswell, where the family that developed Roswell, the 3 homes were there. Miss Simpson in 1976 was 88, and she was the daughter of King Barrington, who started Roswell
Wow.
and invited Jeff and I in, and she got out the biscuits and lemonade. And I mean, we spent 2 or 3 hours there with her, and she took us up in the bedroom, and her whole bedroom was file drawers, and her mother had written as Sherman was approaching, that they were getting ready to leave because Sherman's on our tail and we're going down to St. Simon's Island. And I mean, that was just magical to read that stuff right there.
Yeah. No kidding. Wow. I hope that got donated to an archive or something.
Yeah, I've done a lot of studying over in Roswell, so that will make me ask about that. But I have all my pictures from 1976, and that was, I never forgot it. I loved that town, and when I moved to Georgia, it was like, now where's Roswell? And now I'm over there all the time.
Yeah.
I just love it.
Every place has got
With
its
the
own
Barrington is now
cool story.
the Historical Society building, is it? That Barrington Hall? Up, I don't forget the name of the street, but, they keep all the historical stuff and archives there, which will be, great for everybody to visit.
What is the Camellia? Is it? It's on the way.
Yeah, the Camellia Garden,
Yeah.
Massey
Mass
Lane.
City. There we go.
Massive beaches, are there massive beaches?
I don't
No?
I think there was. I think that family was in the beaches. I mean, at a certain time in the 20th century, lot of landowning families were at least
Okay.
doing something. And sometimes they were just leasing land. And
An 80-year-old brain that's ringing a bell somewhere.
yeah, there's the Massey Lane. So that's Marshallville too. So the camellia,
Is it? Okay.
huge camellia garden.
Different varieties, if you
Yeah,
like flowers.
That's a good draw.
I think you said they last about 30 years or so, typical tree. Does the peach wood itself have any commercial value?
I've heard
Great question.
I've heard
Furniture
of people using it for barbecue.
Okay.
Kind of like they use
Okay.
apple wood. I'm not sure if I'm not a barbecue. I mean, I like barbecue, but I don't know if it really does anything magical or not. But it's not like, I mean, not a huge one.
No
Yeah.
building or anything like that.
No.
I mean, they're not that large.
No, they're not. And in fact, the way I don't have any pictures of commercial peach trees in here, but the way they prune them is they're kind of an umbrella, upside down umbrella shape, and so they have a very short trunk and then these kind of wide branches that allows a lot of sunlight to get into the middle of the tree. So there's not much usable wood in a commercial tree.
But of course, that would make it easier for people to pick them.
Mhm.
But is there any mechanical picking that's done?
No, there's been some research on it. The challenge, and this is also part of the biology of the peach, is just that it's a very tender fruit, and so
Wouldn't hold up.
yeah, it doesn't hold up very well. I mean, it's already unlike apples, which you can keep in cold storage for a year. You know, that's why we're still eating apples in February.
And the farmers like gently pick them.
Right.
I mean, they're
And it
not
takes
tossing them.
no, they're not.
It's like, ooh, ooh.
They take care of them, and it does take some judgment to find, because you need them to be firm, not like fully ripe yet, but you also don't want them too green. So, but now the workers are all guest workers, almost exclusively from Mexico. A lot of them from the same town, Tamaulipas, and so every year they come on these visas for 9 months or 3 months to pick the peaches, because there's not a rural labor force anymore.
Yeah. Well, I'm not gonna do it. Tell you
Yeah, there's these funny stories of
Keep
trying to
what
get
you pick.
volunteer peach pickers. It doesn't go very well. Getting school kids in the summertime.
So interesting. Well, I'm on my way to Marshall. I want to call it Andersonville. Is there a city named Andersonville, Georgia?
Andersonville's where the prison was.
Oh, down
And
near
yeah,
Savannah.
it is.
Savannah.
You could
Is it-
make that the same trip.
It was a prison in the Civil War, right? Yeah, I want to go there too.
Period.
No, but I have a friend that still lives there. I'll call him and tell him you're coming this way.
If anybody's still there.
Yeah.
Sure he
Yeah.
knows.
Well, thank y'all so much for your
All right,
time.
thank you.